Your neighbor, intervention. And what we've been doing, what the heart of this series has been, the undercurrent, my thoughts for this series have been looking at the points of contact that Jesus had with people right before he was going to the cross. I mean, we're talking weeks and days before Jesus was headed to the cross. What was he thinking? Like, who did he meet? What were the points of contact that Jesus made? What kind of intervention was he doing in these weeks and these days leading up to the cross where he knew what would happen? So he was the Son of God. He knew what was about to take place in just weeks and days away. He talked about it because he didn't want his disciples to be uninformed. And so in Matthew 20:17, I don't know if I have this up here, but it says, as Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, now all his disciples knew that I don't know if you remember, but from last week we looked at Lazarus, how he raised Lazarus from the dead. But before they went, y'all remember what Thomas said? Thomas was like, we can't go to Judea. They want to kill you, Jesus. And he's like, okay, well, if we're going to go, then we'll go and die for you. Like, don't sign me up for that plan. I want to go the other way. I don't want to go on the plan where I know I'm going to die. And yet they know that they're looking to kill Jesus. And Jesus, yet he's headed, regardless, he's headed to Jerusalem. And he took the 12 disciples aside privately and he told them what was going to happen to him. Listen, he said, we're going up to Jerusalem where the Son of Man will be betrayed to the leading priests and the teachers of the religious law. They will sentence him to die. Then they will hand him over to the Romans to be mocked, flogged with a whip, and crucified. But on the third day, he will be raised from the dead. And so he just pretty much tells them everything that is about to happen. He's laying it out there. And this isn't the first time. Over and over again, he's telling his disciples, look, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. And so he's laying it out there. Now, in our world, we have dictators, we have people that are in power, that rule, that they don't want their people to be educated. Because if someone is uneducated and you have power over them, you can rule better over them because they don't know any better. But that was never the way that Jesus operated. He wants us to know. As a matter of fact, in Hosea 4:6, God says, the reason my people die is because they have a lack of knowledge. They don't know. They don't know. Proverbs 4:7 says, get wisdom. And in all you're getting, get understanding. God wants us to know. Isn't that beautiful? God doesn't want to pull back the curtain like the Wizard of Oz and is like, just do what I say. And you just have this curtain and you don't know what's going on behind the curtain. Yet God reveals himself to us in his word. But yet because we don't pursue it, we're not looking for it, we don't know it. God says people die because they don't know, because of their lack of knowledge. And so Jesus is laying it out there. And what we're going to look at today is in John chapter 18, the final night before Jesus is arrested. We're going to look at these guys that were there. And actually, as I was reading this past few weeks, preparing for this message, as I was reading, I couldn't help but think back to when I was a teenager, to one of these parties that I went to, okay? Just hear me. I was at this party. There was about 50, 60 people. And there was underage drinking going on. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on, and we're at this party. And this guy's brother comes home. And he comes walking through the fence, and he's a police officer. So he comes walking back there, and he's all in uniform. And I'm going to tell you, I've never seen so many people bail out in my life. I mean, the fence almost falls down because people, they're trying to jump it, but they can't. And they're trying to get away. I mean, they're just scattering like ants. I mean, it was ghetto for sure. I mean, just to say the least. And now, it's not that John 18 was ghetto in any way. But yet his followers, his disciples, the people that he spent time with, the people that he poured his life into, all of a sudden he gets arrested and man, they're nowhere to be found. They're gone. And so we pick it up in chapter 18, verse 1. It says, when Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with the disciples across the brook Kidron, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place. Say that. He also knew the place. Say that with me. He also knew the place. For Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas, having procured a band of soldiers and some officers, he met with the chief priests. They showed up with lanterns, torches, weapons. And Jesus, knowing all that would happen to him, didn't run. He didn't try to hide. He said to them that he would be arrested. He knew this was coming. He stepped up. And he says, "Whom do you seek?" And they answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." And Jesus said to them, "I am He." And you got to know that "I am" is in the Bible known as a term that only God uses. He says, "I am He." And it says, Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. And when Jesus said to them, "I am," they all fell on the ground. I think Jesus was just letting them know, listen, I'm allowing you to take me. All right? This is because I'm letting you arrest me. This isn't something that you have planned. This is my plan. And he says, "I am He," and they fall on the ground. And they get back up, and he says, "Who are you looking for?" And they say, "We're looking for Jesus." And he said, "Well, I'm right here." And so if you seek me, let these men go. Now we all know Judas. His name is synonymous with betrayal. Like, in my whole life, I've never known anybody named Judas. Like, raise your hand if you've ever known anybody named Judas. I don't know anyone named Judas. I know the Jonas Brothers, but I've never heard of Judas. Anyone naming their son, their child, Judas. And when we think of Judas, we think of betrayal, but what we forget is that Jesus handpicked Judas to be His disciple, to walk with Him for 3 years. We forget that when Jesus walked on water, Judas was there. He saw it. When Jesus healed the sick, when he gave sight to the blind, when there was this guy who couldn't walk and Jesus told him to get up and walk, Judas was there. He saw it. He knew everything. And so throughout my life, one of the questions I always asked was, what happened? What happened to Judas? Like, why? Did Jesus drop the ball with Judas? Like what happened there? Now, a while back, Sandra and I, we went zip-lining. I don't know, has anyone ever been zip-lining? You're the man. It's an awesome, if you haven't tried it, you got to try it. Zip-lining is so fun. But we went and she let me plan see, this is what happens when you let a man plan the 9th anniversary. We went zip-lining, we went jet skiing, we went to Austin, and we just it was a great time. But anyways, we went zip-lining, but while you're getting ready, they're suiting you up, they're strapping you in, and then they got to give you this basic training. Because they're like, if you don't do this right, you're going to have a great time, you're going to have an amazing time, but if you don't do this right, you could die, just, the usual stuff. And so Sandra, she's like sweating, she's got the helmet on, and we're trying to figure out how to do this stuff and get this crash course. And they're like, this is how you brake with your hand, this is how you put the clip on the zip line. And this one lady, she didn't get the braking part of it, and she flew into the instructor, almost knocked him over as she's zip lining down this thing, right? And so we got all our equipment, we're ready to go. They've trained us, they've gotten us ready. But if we don't use what we've been given, then it could be dangerous. We could possibly die. And when I look at Judas' life and I read verse 2, it grabbed me. It sucked me in when I read it because it says he knew where to find Jesus. He knew exactly where Jesus would be. When they asked him, he was like, "Oh yeah, I spent 3 years with Jesus. I know exactly where He is. I went through basic training with Jesus. I got all the cliff notes. I did all that. And I know exactly where Jesus will be." And we know that Jesus handpicks Judas. And we know that Jesus loved Judas. Sometimes we think, well, he betrayed Jesus. Someone stabs me in the back. Someone betrays me. My first thought isn't to love that person. And sometimes we forget that Jesus loved Judas. He loved him. Absolutely. Absolutely. No question in my mind that He loved Judas. And so what I see that gives us a good context as to what was going on, and sometimes I've always overlooked this, but as I was studying, I saw this, it stuck out to me, and it was so beautiful. I was reading some of the commentary. But that night, earlier that night, Jesus is hanging out with the disciples. He's hanging out with them before the arrest. He's hanging out with them. They're about to break bread. Jesus is about to switch everything about how you do communion. But He's there with the disciples. And then He says something that blows their mind. Jesus says, They're all talking, they're having a good time. Jesus says, it says that his heart was heavy. Jesus said, one of you is going to betray me. And it just caught him off guard. They're like, what? What? Really? It's not me, is it? Is it me? Am I the one that's going to betray you? And then Jesus says something, and I don't even know if everybody could hear him because he was there and they were at the table. And he says, the one that I dip my bread into, when I dip my bread, the person that I give it to, he's the one that's going to betray me. And see, he dips his bread and he gives it to Judas. And then Judas asks, am I the one? And he said, you've answered your own question. But there's more going on here that I've always missed, that I've never seen, is that in Jewish custom, this is so beautiful, in Jewish custom, when the host was there and as he would break the bread, the host would break the bread, he would serve the food. Jesus was the host. And what he would do is the person of honor at the table, the person of honor that he wanted to honor in the Jewish custom would be the first person that you give the food to. And so when Jesus broke this bread and he dipped it and he gave it to Judas, Judas would have known Jesus is honoring me in front of all these people. Jesus is giving me honor. And I think that this is so beautiful because what we see is this intervention taking place. Jesus is extending his hand out, his life out to Judas. He's trying to tell Judas in so many words, Judas, don't go down this road. Judas, you don't have to do this. You don't have to. You can make a choice. You can make it stop. You don't have to betray me. And he reaches out to him. And I think that this is so beautiful. Because as we look at our lives, well, we know that even in our betrayal, even when we're not faithful, God is always faithful, and his hand is always extended out to us, so that even when we slap his hand away, even when we walk away from him, even when we won't want anything to do with him and we're willing to stab him in the back and cast him out and don't, Jesus' hand is always extended out to us. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And as I was thinking about this, I thought, one of the things that grips my heart, not only as a pastor, as a leader, but as a fellow Christian, and I know because this was me at one point in my life, is that Christians can spend so much time in church and know exactly where to find Jesus. They know where to look for Jesus. They know exactly where he's at. They know how to get to Jesus, and yet they never follow him. And here's point number one, if you have your bulletin. Even when I am not reaching, God is reaching for me. Even when I am not reaching, God is reaching for me. Even in the planned betrayal, Jesus' hand is extended. Now, earlier that same night, there was so much that happened that night. I mean, it's just packed. You got to go back and read it. Earlier that same night, Peter comes up to Jesus. After Jesus says, one of you will betray me, Peter comes up to him and he pulls Jesus aside and he's like, Jesus, you know I'm not that guy. I'm not going to betray you. That's not me. I'm not the one that is going to do that to you. I would never do that to you. And Jesus looks at Peter in the eyes and he says, Peter, I appreciate that, but unfortunately before dawn, when the rooster crows 3 times before dawn, you will have denied me 3 times. And Peter's like, there's no way. That's crazy, Jesus. I give my life for you. I put it all on the line for you. There's no way that I would deny you. And so we know that Jesus is arrested. And it says that Peter was following at a distance. Let's take a look at what happens in verse 15. Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest, but Peter stood outside the door. So the other disciple who was known to the high priest went out and spoke to the servant girl who kept watch, and they brought Peter in. And the servant girl at the door said to Peter, you look familiar. You look familiar. I've seen you before. Aren't you this guy's disciple? And he's like, I don't know that guy. I don't know. And then it says in verse 18, now the servants and the officers had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing and warming themselves. Peter also was standing with them, and he was warming himself. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself, so they said to him, you also, you're one of his disciples, aren't you? And it says he denied it and said, I am not. And then one of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose Peter ear. See, we didn't get all this because this wasn't the focus. But when they came to arrest Jesus, Peter was like a pit bull. I mean, he did stuff before he thought about it. But he whips out his sword and he cuts this guy's ear off. They're coming to arrest Jesus. And Jesus picks up the ear. He puts it back on. I mean, it's just amazing. They're coming to arrest Jesus. And yet Jesus, this is... And it's amazing also to think that the last miracle that Jesus did was fixing one of his disciples' mistakes, putting his ear back on. And he says, you're the guy that was there that night we arrested Jesus. You were just there. You were just there. I saw you. And it says that Peter again denied it. And as soon as he denied it, the rooster crowed. Now, I remember when I was in middle school, my dad, he always worked hard to provide for us, and he would take us out to eat and do all kind of stuff with us. But when I was in middle school, sometimes he would drop me off. Now, one of the things about my dad is that he loved to make his own schedule. And so he thought one of the best ways that he could work for himself is he bought a taxi. And so he bought his own taxi. He worked for himself. He made his own hours. But he would come and he would drop me off at middle school. And every time he would I would always ride in the back. Because I didn't want people to know that this was my dad. I wanted them to think that I called a cab. And I wouldn't give my dad a hug because you don't hug the cab driver. You just don't do that. And I look back and I look at this and it was because I was ashamed. It was because I was ashamed of my dad who always provided for me. And you know, sometimes we're ashamed of Jesus when he's inconvenient to our lifestyle, to our friends, to our image. Now, Jesus knew Peter would deny him. He absolutely knew. He told him. Peter couldn't believe it. But Jesus didn't say, well, Peter, I hope you make it. You know, you're going to deny me. It's going to be all over. I'm going to be arrested. Hope you make it through this. He didn't say that. He told Peter, as a matter of fact, you're going to have the worst night of your life, and you're going to be ashamed of yourself. You're going to wonder at the end of this night whether I still want you to be my disciple. And it says, as Jesus was going to the cross, Peter followed afar off. He was weak. He had failed, but yet he was following afar off, because even though he had denied Christ, his heart was saying, I still want to be with Jesus. I still want Jesus. But yet Jesus is arrested. And they knew that Jesus told them what was going to happen, but they didn't know. They had no idea. Even though Jesus told them. And so Peter wondered if this was the end. Maybe this is just the end of it all. I mean, he's fallen at a distance, but I mean, they got Jesus. He's seeing him. I mean, they're striking Jesus. They're hitting him. They're questioning him. He knows they want to kill him. And so he must have been wondering, is this the end? And you know, maybe this past week, maybe even yesterday, maybe you've blown it big. Maybe you've blown it. Maybe at one time in your life you were confident that God wanted to use your life, but because you've been following afar off at a distance, you haven't really been keeping Him close to you. You haven't been getting into His Word and talking to Him. You're thinking, I know at one time in my life God wanted to use me in a great way, but today I'm not sure. And if you've ever felt like that, or if you feel like that this morning, that's exactly, I'm sure, how Peter felt that night in his denial of Jesus Christ. But you got to look at the whole picture to understand the heart of God. Because Peter never really tested the full love of God. He never really knew. He never really knew. And so what we read, when we continue reading, what we see is that when Jesus rose on that Sunday morning, I didn't have this up on the board, but when Jesus rose on that Sunday morning in Mark 16:7, this is what God says, and this is so beautiful. The first thing that God says is, go tell my disciples and Peter. He calls him out by name. He says, tell them to meet me in Galilee. And he sends a message to Peter, letting Peter know Jesus still wants you. He hasn't given up on you. He still has a plan for your life. And 7 weeks later, check this out, 7 weeks later, when you pick up the story in the book of Acts, the church is ready to explode onto the scene. I mean, they're ready to bust loose in the power of Jesus Christ. And He's commissioning the church. And they're up in an upper room. The book of Acts says they're in an upper room. And God says, I got someone that I need for a mission. I need someone to go and preach for me in Jerusalem in the original language of Aramaic. Who am I going to choose? I got 120 faithful followers that are praying in the upper room. Who am I going to choose? And He says, I know. I'm going to choose Peter. He's going to go and he's going to preach in Jerusalem for me because I'm not done with him. And Peter goes on to be the founding fathers of the early church. You know why? Because he didn't allow failure to remove his focus on Jesus. Listen, you cannot allow failure to derail your focus on Jesus. Don't ever allow your failure to derail your focus on Jesus. That's point number 2. Maybe you failed this past week. Don't allow that to derail you. Get back up. Get back up. God's arm is still extended. It's still extended. If you still have breath in your lungs, Jesus' hand is extended to your life. And here's point number 3. It's not complicated. It's not complicated. And we pick it up at verse 33 as we close this down in the next few moments. It says, so Pilate, he entered his headquarters again. They had arrested Jesus. They brought him to question him. It says that they struck him because he wasn't answering their questions. And then they brought him to Pilate. And then Pilate comes in and he goes, are you the king of the Jews? Because this is what they're saying about you. And Jesus answered, do you say this of your own accord? Or do others say it about me? In other words, Pilate, do you really want to know personally? Or is this just something that you're hearing from other people as they're talking, as they're accusing you? And Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Because Pilate wasn't a Jew. Your own nation. These are your people. If you're the king of them, these are your guys. And the chief priests, they delivered you over to me. What did you do? What did you do that they want to kill you? And what Pilate was saying is that, first of all, even if you are a king of the Jews, that has nothing to do with me. In today's language, we would hear it something like this. Well, you know what? I'm glad that Jesus changed your life and he's doing something for you, but that's just not for me. Jesus, I'm glad. No disrespect, but just, you know what? This Jesus thing, I'm good. I don't really need it. I'm good. You do your thing, I'll do my thing, and we'll just call it good. And then it says that Jesus said, my kingdom isn't of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom isn't of this world. And what he was saying was, you don't understand, Pilate. This isn't a race thing. This isn't a cultural thing. This isn't a me versus you thing. This is about God coming to humanity to save them. He said, you got it all wrong. And just for your information, if I wanted to call back up, you'd all be fried in a second. Verse 37, then Pilate said to him, so you are a king. Jesus answered, you say that I am a king, but for this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world to bear witness to the truth. You see, we have this illusion of a king who is high and mighty, and God is high and He is mighty. But that's why it was so hard for them to see Jesus as a king, yet being arrested and beaten and broken and crucified on the cross. But what they didn't understand is that Jesus said, this is why I came. For this arrest, to be beaten, to be broken on the cross, so that I could save the sins of the world, so that people could be forgiven. This is why I came. And then he says something. Jesus said, everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. And then in verse 38, Pilate said to him, what is truth? What is truth? That's a profound question. That's a profound question. If you've ever thought about the meaning of life, you have asked this question: what is truth? Because you cannot define, you cannot get an answer to the question, to the meaning of life, without defining first that there is a greater truth. You have to first know that there is a truth that is outside of us in order to really find the meaning of life. And so the question is there an absolute truth? Can we know truth? Can we even know? Because it's complicated, right? Is there meaning? Is there a creator? Or are we just here because of an accident? Someone wrote a book? Because a lot of people think that. A lot of people believe that it's all an accident. And in the past decade, scientists have made amazing discoveries. What they found is that inside every single 100 trillion cells in your body is this double helix strand known as DNA. If you were to unravel this thing, it would be 6 feet long. It's inside every single cell in your body. DNA contains the assembly instructions for all the thousands of proteins that make up who you are, your whole body. The DNA in every single cell, every single DNA in every single cell has the assembly instructions for your whole body that make who you are. And what they found is that DNA is the most efficient information storage system in the universe. In the universe. Science that we have can't even come close to replicating what DNA can do. A storage device like DNA, they can't even come close to making something like that. That's like technology far beyond our even wildest dreams to even make anything that can store what DNA stores. And just to give you an example, I heard this from Lee Strobel. He said that if you were to have a teaspoon of DNA, you could fit all of the assembly instructions for the for every 1,000 million species that have ever existed on the planet, and still have enough information to contain every book that's ever been written in a teaspoon of DNA. That's amazing. That's mind-boggling. Like, I'm thinking, where can I get that hard drive? I want to hook that up to my Mac. And every single cell in your body contains a DNA that is like nobody else's. It's just amazing. And so you're thinking, what's the point? Well, if you're walking down the beach and you see a sand dune, no big deal. I mean, the wave made that, that's no big deal. I mean, there's sand dunes all over the place. But you're walking down the beach and you see in the sand, Steve loves Raquel. You're not going to be like, oh, cool, the waves washed up, they kind of made that. That's pretty neat. You would never think that, because nature produces patterns, but it doesn't produce information. And so you're walking further down the beach and you see a Mac on the beach. You're not going to be like, wow, weathering, that's pretty cool. How weathering kind of made that Mac. Look at DNA. And come to the conclusion that it just came about by accident. This most efficient storage system in the whole universe. And people can come across that and say, that just kind of happened in nature. It just kind of happened because of a random series of events that came together. Like, it would be more probable for the MacBook to show up than for our DNA to have showed up the way it is. Because DNA technology blows away anything that we have ever created. And so what we see, if you really look for truth, is that there is an intelligent design behind that. There is this intelligent design that made that. And that's just one example of thousands. I don't even have time. This isn't even about what this message is about. But we're looking at truth. But here's the deal. We can ignore the evidence. We can ask, what's truth? But do we really want to know that? Do we really want to know the answer to that question? And I'm going to tell you something. A lot of people don't want to know the answer to that question because truth runs contrary to the way that I want to live my life. And because truth doesn't line up with my life, because obviously the world revolves around me. And so because truth doesn't revolve around my life, it's not truth. There's got to be another way. I mean, it's just not truth. I mean, I can pretend there's no gravity and walk off a building. I'm not going to fly as much as I want to. I mean, I can ignore gravity. I can ignore the truth. Here's the deal. A lot of us think, how can we know the truth? Because it's just too complicated. But here's the real deal. We complicate it, but it's not complicated. Tell your neighbor, it's not complicated. Pilate threw it out there. What is truth? And the crazy thing about it is Jesus doesn't answer his question. Jesus didn't answer his question. You know why? Because Pilate didn't really want to know. Pilate wasn't asking him what is truth. He was just saying, well, what is truth anyway? See, if we really want truth, God will never tell you, you can't handle the truth. God will never say that to us. He'll reveal himself to us. He will give us his truth. If we really want it. And so what I want to do is, as we close, I just want to take a look at this moment. And there's this moment that Jesus had with his disciples right before this whole arrest thing went down. I'm telling you, this whole night, if you go back and look through the Gospels, it's just amazing what Jesus was setting them up for. I mean, what Jesus was preparing. I mean, he had prepared them for 3 years. I mean, this whole story is just amazing. But yet in this final night, there's so much that Jesus is reaching out to us. And so we pick it up in John 14:4. This was the night that Jesus was arrested. Jesus already told them exactly how everything was going to go. And Jesus says, and where I go, you know. And the way, you know. And in the next verse, in verse 5, as a matter of fact, when I look at verse 4, I think that's pretty bold of Jesus to say, you know. You know. Where I'm going, you know. The way, you know. And you gotta love Thomas. I mean, if you can't relate to Thomas, you haven't lived life. I mean, Thomas, I gotta think that he was a Texan, right? I mean, he was a thinker. I mean, Thomas was a thinker. I need evidence. I mean, Thomas was like, okay, if we're going, we're going to die. I mean, at the end, when Jesus shows up, he's like, I just can't believe it's you. And Jesus has got to show him this pierced hands and be like, no, Thomas, it's me. Thomas was a thinker. He thought things through. I mean, he's like us. He was a normal guy. And so Jesus says, the way you know, where I'm going, you know, and everybody's there, and I don't know if they're pretending like they know, but Thomas is in the back, and he raises his hand, and he's like, Lord, I don't know. I don't know the way. I mean, how am I supposed to know? How can I know? We don't know where you're going. We don't know. We don't know. He says, Thomas said to the Lord, we don't know where you're going. And how can we know the way? It's complicated. It's complicated, Jesus. You gotta uncomplicate it for us. We have no idea. How can you tell me that I know when I don't know? And Jesus tells Thomas, it's not complicated. You're overcomplicating things, Thomas. You know. You know. And Jesus responds in verse 6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And no one comes to the Father except through me. Now, I'm not in any way trying to debate the complexity of life. Life is complex. It all starts when we're young, and then we're single, and then we have relationships, and we get married, and we have kids, and then we have all these things, and we have friends, and he did this to me. And so we have so much complex things in life. And then once you have kids, you realize you need a master's degree just to put in the child seat in the car, and it's frustrating, and life is complex. I'm not trying to debate that life is not. Life is complex. And if you would stand up and say, my life isn't complex, not even a few layers, then you need to get out more. Because life is complex. If you don't know that already, life is complex. But our relationship with God isn't. And yet, I've made it complicated. And you've made it complicated. And sometimes as a pastor, I can say things, and as a church, we've made it complicated for the people. And it's when it's not complicated. I had this guy who comes up to me at work, and he's a guy I talk to, and he's coming up to me, he's like, what do you think about tongues? What do you think about salvation? And can you lose it? Can you save it? And he's fighting with these other Christians, and I'm like, bro, we're on a mission to save the world. We can't get caught up with all this stuff that doesn't even make a difference. We need to be after this, to seek and save the lost. That's what Jesus came for. And yet we can get caught up in all these debates. Listen, you believe the way you want, as long as we believe that Jesus Christ is the Lord and Savior of our lives, if we can agree on the base things, then we can know the truth. It's not complicated, yet we as a church sometimes have made it complicated. Personally, we make it complicated, but it's not. And I know what some of you are thinking. Some of you want to raise your hand and you're like, no, it's complicated. Like, is he serious right now? Like when you look at the whole thing, I mean, you realize there's 40 different authors, there's 66 different books, you got the historicity, you got the all the things about prophecy, and there's so much to know, and I got to go to Bible college just to learn all this. How can I figure it all out? It's just too complex. And then some people show up at church, and they have no idea what's going on. I don't know when to clap. I don't know when to say amen. I don't know. You look around like, I don't know. Now that guy over there, he knows. Or maybe he pretends like he knows. And the pastor, obviously, he knows. And because they know, I'm just going to pretend like I know, even though I don't know. But I don't want anybody to know that I don't know. But yet deep down inside, we're saying, I don't know. I don't know. And Jesus says to Thomas, guys, you know. And Thomas does what we have all done. No, I don't know. And then he's there with all the disciples. I can imagine. He's like Peter? Because Peter, do you know? Or James or Bartholomew, who Jesus never mentions, do you know? Because I don't know. I don't know the way. I don't know where you're going. How am I supposed to know? And Jesus, you know that we don't know. So how can you say that we know? And then Jesus responds. He's like, Really, guys, you spent 3 years with me. Really, guys, I poured my life into you guys. Really. And I don't think that Jesus is saying this in a way like hateful or upset. But he's like, guys, you still don't get it. And he's like, I'm right here. I'm right here. I am the way. I am the way because I'm the truth and I'm the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I'm the door that everybody must go through in order to get to God. There is no other way. And yet people want to say there's all these religions and they all lead to the same place and it's all good and there's 50 different ways. And God is like, that's too complicated. There isn't 50 different ways. There's not 10 different ways. There is one way. It is not complicated, and it's through my Son, Jesus Christ, who came and died on a cross so that you could be forgiven of your sins. It's not complicated. There's one way, and it is all about Jesus Christ. It's all about Jesus. He's saying, I'm your one-stop shop. I am everything you need right here, Thomas. You know, we start out in Sunday school learning, Jesus loves me. This I know. And yet 85 years later, when I get to the end of my life, it's all about Jesus loves me. This I know. He gave His life for me. It's not complicated. And listen, church, please forgive me if I've made it about anything else, because it is all about Jesus. And as a church, we're going to make it all about Jesus. This is the hope that we get to offer our community. This is the hope that I get to tell other people about. Jesus changed my life, and when I offer Jesus to somebody else, Jesus will change their life, and His hand is always extended. And as a church, we are not going to stop. We are going to extend our hand to the northwest side of San Antonio, to our city, to change, to let people know Jesus loves you. He died for you. He wants to change your life. He wants to give you a greater way that you don't even know about. And this is a beautiful message of Christ. That He came. He died on the cross. He took the penalty that we should have taken. That's not hard. That's not complicated. Like if I'm guilty, I deserve that punishment. And yet Jesus steps in and He's like, I'm innocent, but I'm going to take His place. And that's exactly what He did for the world. I'm going to take their place. so that if they believe in me, they confess with their mouth and believe in their heart that I am Lord, they will be saved. It's not complicated. I'm asking you to stand with me today.